Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, people of all color, folks of all neurodiversities, welcome to Speaking of the Spectrum, your autism podcast for everyone. And I say everyone because whether you're an autism parent, such as like myself and my co host, whether you're autistic on the spectrum, whether you know somebody who is autistic, who you love or care for, or just have heard about, or not, and you're just looking to listen to a good conversation between two energetic folks and their special guest, I guarantee you this the next few minutes will be worth your time. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks also to our sponsors, Pulse MD and Pan Dermatology, for sponsoring us and making this possible. Who am I, you ask? I didn't forget to introduce myself first, Joe. My name is Shahrukh Sultan, the man with a plan from Pakistan. I'm a project manager by day. I'm the vice president of Autism Society Greater Hudson Region on some days. And on every day, I'm an autism parent. And on many nights, I also have to be an autism parent because my kid will wake me up in the middle of the night and ask for random things, which is totally fine because that's how we get things done. And then my co-host, drum roll please, the multiple book author, the child prodigy, the human Kaizen expert, the duck cosplayer, the collector of Hawaiian shirts, and I'm leaving out a lot of important things because this man is very impressive. I've recorded over a dozen episodes with him, and still he drops gems on me. Joe Templin.
Brother, it's great being with you here today. I'm really excited, not just to see you as usual, but because of our incredible special guest tonight.
Joe, introduce our special guest.
So our special guest, Shahrukh and I got a chance to meet last year at our Autism Soiree or whatever we
Soiree
were
for
calling
Autism.
Here. It is Chris Banks, who loves the Saratoga track and was just up recently for that. But he took over as the national CEO for the Autism Society roughly basically when COVID started. And so had to direct us through that incredibly disruptive time period and has done so with flying colors. And, you know, I don't want to take his thunder away in any way, shape, or form. Here's the guy, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen, and it's a delight. I'm grateful that you invited me. Yes, I did get to spend some time up at the spa, and I enjoyed that. Nowhere near as much time as I enjoyed being at the soiree earlier this year during Autism Acceptance Month. But thank you for having me.
I'll never forget that moment, Chris. The soiree was wrapping up. We had those hats going around with, the fancy, hats. And then I was like, man, should I ask Chris, like, if he wants to be on the podcast or not? And like, I was almost like a little bit starstruck, right? And then I was thinking, and it turned out you're walking towards us, me and Joe, and you're like, hey guys, I'd love to be in your podcast. I'm like, oh my God, yes. Like, thank you.
Total fanboy moment.
Total fanboy moment, so thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah. Chris, like there's so many questions I want to ask, right? But so let me actually pose it to you. Like, what is as the president and CEO of the Autism Society, right? As Joe mentioned, you took over during the pandemic. There's so much, like the whole world is changing. Autism is a moving target in terms of like what we want to solve or do for it, right? And I've talked about the spectrum as not being just like a spectrum for those, it's the autism spectrum, but it's like a 4-dimensional spectrum because you have people related to autism that are impacted too, and it keeps growing and growing and growing, and there's more awareness. Sure. and the numbers are changing, and then you have the pandemic changing things. And now you step in. So what is your number one goal, or what is the number one thing you have in mind that you want to like attack and solve, and like where do you want to take this?
On a global perspective, in the big picture, I want the Autism Society to be at the center of all things autism. That for me means that whether we're talking about employment, whether we're talking about individuals with complex medical and physical needs, whether we're talking about autism parents, siblings, and family members or caregivers, or we're talking about public advocacy like the Autism Cares Act, which is sunsetting on September 30th. I know we're going to be broadcasting right after that. So these are just some of the many topics, areas of focus that the Autism Society must be at the center of if we're going to make sure that we represent the entire continuum and the entire community of autism. Both of you have spoken about it before. The idea that autism impacts an individual is such a fallacy. It impacts a community.
Yeah.
It impacts families, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, schools, employers, first responder community, our
Mhm.
criminal justice system, our churches. I could go on and on. So the idea of being at the center of all things autism is to make sure that the Autism Society, as we represent all of those components of the community, most and foremost self-advocates, but when we represent all of that community, we make sure that we're at the center of that. So when we're making decisions as a government, as a community, as an organization, as a family, as a friend, we're thinking about what does this mean for the autistic individual and community. Autism Society of America at the center of all things autism.
Now, Chris, you had mentioned the Autism Cares Act. For
Yeah.
people who aren't legislative junkies, can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Well, first, I am not a legislative junkie. I will do a layman's job of trying to explain it. So, the Autism Cares Act is a piece of legislation that sunsets every 5 years. Unlike many pieces of legislation that would evergreen, that would just continue, members of the autism community must go before Congress and get them to reappropriate the funding for the Autism Cares Act. The Autism Cares Act provides funding for research, for AUCD, which is the American University Centers for Disabilities, for the LEND Act, which provides training for future leaders in the IDD space. It provides funding for research in autism. It does a lot of things for the autism community without providing the funding for direct services and supports. That happens through Medicaid and through the CMS. But we have a real vested interest in seeing that act continued every 5 years. It sunsets on September 30th, 2024. We're fighting real hard on a federal level to make sure that members of Congress vote this through. You would think it'd be a no-brainer, right? But
Yeah.
it's never a no-brainer, especially in an election year, a presidential election year, right? And we always have to make sure that the funding is there. We'd like to see more funding for supports for communication, supports for individuals with complex medical and physical, medical and behavioral health needs. We'd like to see more funding to go towards research and including those with complex and severe medical and behavioral health needs involved in their studies. We'd also like to make sure that we don't see the pie get smaller for the support for the autism community.
On a macro scale that resonates, right? Because I mean, I talked about like things that should be a no-brainer, right? And one of the questions that gets asked to me a lot is like, what would you like to see in that perfect world, like a perfect autism society, if you would, right? And by autism society, I don't mean the organization, I mean like as a community, right?
Sure.
And the thing that comes to mind always, and I keep talking about this, is you see the handicap ramps, right? You see special seating for folks that are physically handicapped, which is obviously very, very important and should be at the forefront. But then the counterpart of that is like for someone that's neurodiverse or autistic, where's the accommodation? Are we getting there yet, right? I don't think we're there yet, right? And the small example I like to give is, and this is a very selfish example perhaps, because of my family and I want to go get a nice meal. It's tough to find the right spot or restaurant where that'll accommodate something like that. I'm not saying it's tough, it's not built into our infrastructure, right?
Right.
If I drive up to a restaurant or I know the owner, I've been there before, they'll know what to do, but it takes a bit of work, right? I really want that to be a thing
Sure.
that's like, it's set up, like you have a card or a handicap badge or something, you go and there's special seating for you, right? Which kind of brings me to our Adam Project tip, actually, which is related to this. So to set up the Adam Project, Chris, if you like Ryan Reynolds, right, as we all do,
Everybody loves
everybody
Ryan
likes Reynolds, and if you like time travel, so he had a movie called The Adam Project, right, and we're trying to steal that from him in hopes to get his attention, right, but the Adam Project, for as far as our podcast goes, stands for Autism Dads and Moms. So we try to, on this section, we try to bring in some tips either from people who listen to the podcast or friends or family or ourselves. So the one I have today is kind of related to this. Is in especially this year, my wife and I were always thinking about like how do we get to places that'll make it easier for our son to transition, right? If he doesn't like to get out of the car, what can we do? And turns out, then for those listening or parents listening who don't know, turns out you can actually get a handicap pass even if your child doesn't have a physical disability, even if it's autism or something else. you can actually get that. And the process, at least in New York, wasn't too bad, like, which is rare for me to say in New York State, right? But all I had to do was fill out a form, which was available
Right.
on the DMV's website, get it signed by the doctor, and then actually go to your town, not the DMV. And that's all it is. It's free. You get, I think, you can get a pass for each of your cars, and then you just hang that up. And it was wonderful because literally the next day we happened to be going to Toronto by car for a little family getaway. They have great food there for halals, by the way. So, so not even halfway through our journey, it was raining really, really hard, and there was a rest area, and we had to stop, and my son needed to go to the bathroom and get some food. So it was raining hard. I was like, he's not going to get out of the car this way. And I remembered, oh, wait, we have this handicap pass. We had the first spot right across the door from the rest area. We got off, jetted through, and it was like easy. I was like, oh, wow, this is great. Like, I had no idea. So that's one thing I'd recommend if anyone who, with child that's autistic, like, go get that. It's in every state. I
Right.
think it's free. The other thing was, you can actually, again, if your kid doesn't have to have a physical disability, but even if he's autistic, like my kids, he doesn't like walking around in malls or stuff, or like if you go to a tourist area, he's not going to walk around, but he doesn't mind sitting in a chair and playing on his iPad, right? So we put that together. We're like, can we get him a wheelchair, right? It's like you can get these strollers from Amazon for about $200 or so, or if you can't get that, like ours broke, right? Because my son's getting bigger now, so it broke. So
Right.
you go to a mall, you go ask them for a handicap chair. Simple as that. They don't really ask for much. You just maybe give them a copy of ID, and you have a handicap, wheelchair. Your son can sit on it. You wheel him around, and instead of spending only 20 minutes at the mall, my wife gets to spend some of my money. We get to spend like 3 hours of shopping. So that's my item project tip of the day.
But, some of the side effects of that is, the child is happier, which means that you can have longer time with it. You get more time with your spouse. But, pushing a wheelchair, which is something I've been doing in terms of training for the ability experience races.
Yeah, we talked about that
that
last
thing,
season. Yeah.
Gives you that physical activity at a higher level, which allows you to blow off some steam, which is going to increase your patience, which will help you have more tolerance to be
Never
able
thought
to
about
deal
it,
with
yeah.
your kids. So it's one of those things where it is a multiplicative effect. And as you've talked about many a time, if we do the things to take care of the most vulnerable members of our society, it's going to have positive benefits that ripple through and take care of everybody. And that's just another example of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah, I
Joe's.
think, gentlemen, what you're talking about is universal design.
Hmm.
And what you're talking about is general acceptance. Imagine a world where you don't need that pass,
Yeah.
where you don't need special treatment, that accommodations are so readily available because we recognize everybody comes with different supports and needs, right? So those tips are really exciting. Take to what's my big picture for the Autism Society. If we're at the center of all things, then we don't start to say, well, I don't see a wheelchair, so he might not be disabled. No, we don't live that way. We don't think that way.
Yeah.
What a great offense it is to the autism community that some people don't understand that it's not a physical disability like you would see if you were using a wheelchair, but rather it's a neurodiverse disease. And as a result of that, there are different impacts that it has, right? Can you
Yeah.
imagine the difference it would be? All of those benefits you just spoke about, Joe, absolutely, right? What happens if we don't need that? Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
That would be incredible.
And then, Chris, while we obviously have you, right?
Yeah.
As an affiliate, right, in New York State, what's your recommendation, advice, tips for us to take things in that direction? Like, obviously, we're doing everything we can. We're trying to, like, work on a different scale. But overall, like, if I could take anything away from you and pass it on to the board and everyone listening, what would that be for us as an affiliate?
Sure. Well, if I can go a little bit broader, right? So,
Yeah.
for the listeners who don't know, the Autism Society of America has 70 affiliates across the United States. We're the oldest and largest grassroots autism organization in America, founded by a group of parents, one of whom was from Albany, New York,
Oh,
Ruth
wow.
Sullivan.
Woohoo!
Okay.
Wow.
And Dr. Ruth Sullivan was looking for supports and services for her son, Joseph. And as a result of that, she started with a group of other parents and Dr. Bernie Remlin in San Diego, the National Society for Autistic Children. And it evolved and to where it is today, where we have affiliates across the country to provide supports and services for the autism community. Remember, that's not just the autistic individual, that's not just the mom and dad, that's the siblings, that's the caregivers, that's the educators. Supports and services for the whole community of the autism space. And as an affiliate in upstate New York, right? You have a rich tradition. You are an active affiliate at legislating in Albany. And I think that needs to continue so that we get to a place where we can talk about something else that we haven't brought up yet, which is about acceptance. See, there's been a lot of movement and conversation about awareness, and God bless us for moving forward with that. I'm fine with that. I think it's very important to raise the level of awareness of autism, what it is, what it's not. What does an accommodation mean? Why are there so many low-cost opportunities in front of us that we don't take advantage of? From an accommodation point of view, like you just described, getting a pass that really didn't take too much effort.
Yeah.
And again, milestone statement for some states. And as a former New Yorker, I can say that, right? But I think that it's important that we remember that with the affiliates, there's the opportunity to do supports and services at the local level. There's opportunity to do some advocacy at the state level, right? And there's also the real important part, which is to know that affiliates address the needs of the individuals where they are at the time they're at their experience. Let me put this into other terms, right? When the rivers flooded in New York and people were real concerned about what was going to happen there, right? There had to be an emergency response team for that. Who was thinking about the autism community when that was happening?
Mm-hmm.
Who was thinking about the displaced families from the floods? Who was thinking about the lack of access to supports and services? Who was thinking about how to make sure that accommodations were made so those individuals impacted got what they needed? By the way, no different than what we at the Autism Society encouraged everybody to do during COVID. During COVID, I did Facebook Live interviews with a lot of different people. Did 2 a week for months. And the ones that really got my attention were the parents and the folks who said, on Friday, I left work. I was a bank teller. On Monday, I was told not to come to work, and I became a teacher because I now was educating my kid at my dining room table.
Yeah.
Right? How do we support that parent? Right? Or siblings trying to make sure their brothers and sisters are okay. How do we do that? Or the self-advocate who, when they were being interviewed, I could see the pizza boxes behind them and say, man, how are you eating? What are you doing? Right? So I think that as an affiliate, I know there's a little bit of a long answer and I apologize, but I think the idea is as an affiliate, you meet the needs of the autism community where they are. And our job, our mission is a world where everybody has the resources they need when they need them. And I think that's what an affiliate does. The national office supports the affiliates.
Yep.
The national office increases our brand awareness so that people say, I want to look at this. And as we do all of this work, then we move from awareness to acceptance. And acceptance is that world where it won't matter that we have this, that people are going to think about universal design for solutions that apply for the neurodiverse community and the neurotypical community. That's, I think, what the future is for the Autism Society and for our local affiliates.
Right. I think you captured a lot of things there, but one thing I'm going to touch upon super quickly was brand awareness and brand recognition, and also they're going to get there by doing what, Joe? By speaking of the spectrum. Like, check those out. We have, for everyone following, these are brand new mugs. These just came in. They even include a QR code to our different sites. Chris, I'm going to make sure you get one of these since you set this up so perfectly for us. But Joe, how can somebody watching or listening get one of these? I'm going to let you figure this one out. You're the finance guy.
Yeah, I'm the finance guy, and I am a chartered advisor of philanthropy, so I'm all about donations, stuff like that. So the first person who decides to give a $500 donation to the Autism Society of the Greater Hudson region on our website, asghr.org/podcast. First person to do that, you can give $500, we'll give a mug. And if you're in the Capital District, I will make sure it was filled with coffee and I will personally deliver it and hang out.
I will join you for that one, Joe. That's going to be an epic outing. It'll be a great road trip. So there you go, guys. There you have it. That's official. The other thing, Chris, I was going to come back to is we usually talk about a fact of
Yeah.
the day, but I think you dropped a really big one and it came from you, which I'm going to, I think, make it official. That our fact of the day was that the Autism Society of America National was started in where we're sitting
There
right
you
here,
go.
Albany, New York.
Yep.
Take that. Like everybody. Like,
Yeah.
Let's make sure if we're going to do facts, let's make sure we're factual. It was
okay.
founded in Teaneck, New Jersey, but one of the co-founders
Okay.
was from Albany, New York.
Well, we don't need
Semantics.
that many facts.
That's right.
I know. So the two of you guys ascribe to the theory, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I got it.
Exactly. I'm a writer.
Exactly. There you go. Chris gets us. Chris gets us.
Now, Chris, one of the things that we were talking about before we started the podcast today was the Justice Center and
Yeah.
what we're doing there. And so this is important because, unfortunately, members of our community have run-ins with law enforcement at a much higher rate than the non-neurospicy community. So
Yeah,
can you
the
talk
nor-
about this a little bit?
Sure. Autistic individuals are about 5 times more likely to interact with police before they're 21. Okay.
5 times more.
And that issue gets exacerbated for the Black and the Brown community at disproportionate rates. And like, guys, I am one of these folks who do not believe that a policeman wakes up and says, "Who can I arrest today?" or "Who am I going to be able to shoot today?" I just don't buy it. I've heard the arguments. I just don't buy it. I think there's tremendous support for the autism community through the first responder community. And anybody who doubts me on that, come with me for the month of April to go through all the different autism walks that I go to and see all the first responders who donate their time, who show up, who are wearing the logo patches or the autism patches, or they shrink wrap their police vehicles. I mean, they care. And the reason they care is because they're part of us. They're the parents and the siblings of members of the autism community as well. And it's the right thing to do. And so one of our national programs is on first responder training. So we want to train the first responder community to how to better interact with the autism community, parents as well as autistic individuals, but also to train the autistic community to better interact with the first responder community, right? So take, for example, if there were an incident or an issue and the police know, hey, I'm informed this individual's autistic, I probably shouldn't try to grab them or touch them unless I have to, right? They've got to do their job and keep people safe. But, sometimes we would touch somebody to get their attention. Maybe that's not the right thing to do for somebody who's autistic who may respond differently. I have friends in Indiana who work with the police to make sure that if they come down their street and are going to the house, turn the lights off, because if the sirens off, because if the sirens are going when they're in the driveway, that will really upset their autistic child. And so what was a bad situation just becomes a horrific situation.
Yeah.
Those are two very minute examples. But I just was the keynote speaker for Project Lifesaver, a program in Florida that is worldwide, but founded in Chesapeake, Virginia, and Florida. And they do radio locations of missing individuals, water and wandering, a terrific challenge for us. I'll give you another factoid to use in the future, right? The second leading cause of death of autistic individuals, autistic children, is drowning.
Wow, he's setting up a
And
future
we need to
podcast.
stop that. I'm sorry?
You're setting up a future podcast when we bring in Mary Caveney.
Well, there you go. I mean, water wandering is so important, and we need to not just teach safety there, but we also need to teach instructors. Bringing this back to the Justice Center, so that those two programs fall under what we call Safety on the Spectrum for the Autism Society. And we're piloting these programs across the country with our affiliates to help them set up their training and help set up the interaction with the first responder community. The Justice Center, however, is the nation's first Justice Center for the autism community. It does not exist anywhere else but the Autism Society of America. There are other very successful, very helpful, very cooperative programs for a variety of individuals. The ARC does a lot of great work for those in the neurodiverse community. Ours is set up specifically for the autism community. And we are representing and advocating on behalf of some just horrific challenges for the community. Right now, as we speak, there's a gentleman in Texas on death row, and we're doing everything we can to get Governor Abbott to grant him clemency. Um, Otherwise, he's going to be executed. And
Mm.
and part of the reason he is going to be executed is because he didn't respond the way that the medical community and the police thought that he should have, as somebody who was dealing with the death of his daughter. But he is autistic and he follows routines and he follows a certain pattern, and he did that. And when he described it, the medical community didn't think that he was um, emotionally moved by the death of his child appropriately, and as a result, he ends up being found or accused of and then found guilty of murdering his daughter. And all the circumstances around it dictate that that probably wasn't the case. This gentleman in Idaho right now, who was arrested after he fell on a customer while he was doing some cable installation at his home, at her home, and he literally just fell. He lost his balance and fell on the customer. And when the police showed up, he told them, "I know I did something I shouldn't have done." They took that as admission guilt. He was arrested, and now he's being represented by a public defender who doesn't understand autism. Thankfully, Carleen Ponder, our executive director for the Justice Center, is doing a lot of work to train public defenders so that they understand how better to represent the autism community.
Mm.
Those are just some examples. There are many others we don't even know about. This all got started, by the way, because of some really horrific situations. Young man in Utah being shot 12 times by the police when his parents called looking for the crisis intervention team to come help. A 28-year-old black man in Philadelphia who had mental health issues was carrying a kitchen knife. He wouldn't put it down. He charged at the police. They shot him on the streets of Philadelphia. I have a personal story of somebody contacting me because their friend's daughter, had verbal outbursts, and as a result, she was going to be evicted from her apartment complex. Clear violation of ADA. Clear violation of ADA. And so we talked to the landlord, and one thing led to another, and I said, wouldn't it be far easier to move the family that complained about the verbal outburst, than go through the fight that we're going to put you through, because you're going to ask this girl to move, you're going to ask this girl to change her bus route, you're going to ask her to change her public school.
Yeah.
All of this is going to have negative impact. That's the kind of stuff I want to see the Justice Center fighting for. I like to talk about it in three parts. Educate. Let's educate the community on how to better serve the autism community as a whole. Mitigate. Let's see if we can't get somewhere in the middle of this and help everybody. And lastly, we'll litigate if we need to. That's the Justice Center. I think it's really important, and I can't say enough about how important it is for us to do this work. And we'll do it at a national level, and then we'll bring it to the state by state by state.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, it's moving, but at the same time, it's motivating, right? Like we have so much work to do, right? I mean,
Sure.
so much work to do. And in every small way at a personal level, as whether or not you're part of a board of a nonprofit or not, or just a parent or not, or someone who's not even like related to. I gave a small example a few episodes ago where a friend and I were driving. We saw a gentleman acting a little, unwieldy. And my friend's reaction was like, "Oh, he's probably a little crazy or something. Let's move around." I'm like, "No, maybe he's autistic." And then that suddenly changed our perspective on how we're going to approach this person, right? And that's just a very personal, like, I'm not like a law officer or anything, right? But like, imagine that situation in a different circumstance, right? And that's where we talk about, Chris, is like, imagine a world where we don't have to talk about special accommodations or handicap beds. It's just a thing that's known. It's such a no-brainer for those who are in it, but hopefully we can get there by
continuing to speak of the spectrum.
Continue to speak of the spectrum. I think that. Go ahead, Chris.
I think that, I wanted to interrupt, if you don't mind.
Yep.
The idea that we have to help people to understand the autism community will always be with us. The autism community is not getting smaller, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
And so we need to figure out how to make it part of the fabric of our understanding.
Yeah.
And we do that through awareness, then we do it through acceptance, and then we do it through belonging, right? And I think it's that important.
Yeah, I think the belonging is it's a new thing for me. Is like how to get somebody who's not related to autism or something to belong to that, like friends or coworkers or random person on the street. Like, do you belong to the same community that you're not actually part of? But it's not visible, but it's there, right? And
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
You know, I'm going to use an example that I've used a lot when it comes to this. So when I was younger and my children were younger, I coached the Little League softball league team. And down the street was a girl who was the same age as my daughter, but she didn't play ball, right? That's awareness. I'm aware that she's there.
Mm-hmm.
Acceptance is when I go knock on the door and say to the parents, I coach Little League softball. I notice your daughter is here. She's the same age as my daughter. I'd love to have her come on the team. And most of the time, this happened, the parents say, my daughter doesn't know how to play softball. Well, that's my job. As a coach, I'm going to teach her how to play softball. And then the parent comes to the softball game and sees the daughter at second base, not in the right field. Because I don't only want her to be on the team, I want her to be in the game. I want her to feel like she's a part of what's going on. And when you're in right field, you're picking up daisies, you're doing cartwheels, and you're doing everything but watching what's happening. When you're at second base, you're watching every pitch. And I use that because it's a true story, and I use it because it's about acceptance. And once I do that, she's in the infield, now she's got a sense of belonging. Well, that same concept, I believe, happens for the autism community. So when we see somebody, as you just referred to, having some kind of an episode, whether they're, some people call it a meltdown, some people call it a form of communication, some of us call it advocating, because they're letting us know they want something different, rather than make suppositions or assumptions of what they are or what they need. Figure it out by talking with them and saying, what is it I can do to help you? How can I help you? Or when, when we have a parent who is with somebody who has significant support needs, some call them severely or profoundly impacted by autism. We at the Autism Society refer to them as those with complex medical and behavioral health needs. How do we help the parent? How do we help the caregiver they're with? How do we stop and say, is there anything I can do to help you? To me, that's a sense of belonging. You belong in this store. You belong in this park. You belong in this restaurant. You belong in society, with society, among society. How can we help you to feel part of that?
That's beautiful. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. I do want to be respectful of your time, but don't take my word. I'm not going to promise I'm not going to reach out to you again to come back someday.
No,
So thank you so
I'm
much
happy
for
to
your
do
time. Maybe next time
I'm
we
happy
can.
to do it.
Yeah. So maybe next time we can catch you in person. It'll be awesome. So thank you so much for your time, sir. Joe, any final wrap up thoughts from your side?
Well, we've got a couple of things that we normally do that we didn't do this time. Talking about a hero, and quite frankly, I think Chris gave us a hero with the head of the advocacy. He's given us a lot of these things. We talked very often about autism in different languages, but again, Chris brought up how when an individual has a breakdown or a tantrum or whatever, but he's calling it, they're advocating. So just this expansion of language, this expansion of concepts and visions that Chris has brought to the national organization is helping the affiliates bring on out. And hopefully we can do here on the podcast, because as we always say, the only way that we're going to improve, the only way we're going to evolve as a society is if we continue to do this. And that is speaking of the spectrum.
Thanks all. Catch you next episode. Bye-bye.